Good evening, everybody. How's everyone tonight? We're going to get started. My name's Steve Lombardi, and I'm the Executive Director of the East Greenwich Chamber of Commerce, and I want to welcome you and thank you for being here tonight. And thank you for your interest in the School Construction Bond Forum. East Greenwich News, East Greenwich Chamber, and the East Greenwich Rotary Club, along with New England Tech, are all supportive of education here in our community, and that's why we're glad that you're here, and we're going to hear from our distinguished panel in a second. A couple of things I just want to mention. What we'd like to do is just have everybody hold applause. The questions are going to come already to Liz, so there won't be any questions for the audience. Hold your applause to the end. Let every speaker finish their presentation, and I'm sure we'll have a great presentation tonight. So Liz McNamara of East Greenwich News is our moderator. Liz, you want to come up and take over? And thank you all for coming. And thank you, panelists.
Hi all. Let's see here. Is this loud enough, do you think?
Yeah.
Those of you in the back, everyone's nodding their head. That's great. Let me see if I can figure out how to make this like that. There seems to be a time on that, but what I'm going to do is, there's that's the issue at hand. Anyway, thanks Steve for the introduction, and thank you to the Rotary for being out there. I want everybody to see this. Anyone with kids, scholarship fund the Rotary has, there's a lot of scholarships that they are offered to our students here in East Greenwich, and the Rotary Scholarship is one of them, so pick up a flyer. Thank you to New England Tech for the space, and as always to the East Greenwich Chamber for being our partner on these forums. It's really nice to know that we have such dependable partners in the community. We have several members of our board here tonight, as well as Steve and Susie, who we had hoped would be live streaming this. Unfortunately, the Wi-Fi is not cooperating, so if anyone's here and people are wondering why they can't see it, if you just let them know, we are sorry. But the good news is we have Kyle Egan in the back there, a New England Tech student who is videotaping this for us, and we'll upload it to our YouTube channel. So hopefully within a few days, it should be there for viewing. The questions tonight are all from readers. We got a lot of good questions, and I just want you to know that they teach me something every time this happens. People have great questions, and not only are they going to be helpful tonight when we hear from these guys, but it will be helpful in terms of our own reporting, knowing where we need to report and report more. So the only other thing I wanted to say was introduce everybody. Andy Nada here is our town manager. Derek Osterman is with Colliers. Allison Powell is the chair of the school committee. Brian Ricca is our superintendent of schools. And then that guy at the end, I recognize him. He hasn't been around very long. Mark Schwager, president of the town council. Thank you all for taking part. I appreciate it. So let's get to the questions. We're hoping to keep this to 1 hour, and I have asked everybody to be as concise as possible so we can get to all the questions. We won't get to them all probably, but again, we know what we need to report if we don't get to them all. So the first topic is reimbursement. The state will be reimbursing up to 55% of what we borrow, and if that's $150 million, then we would be getting that 55% reimbursement. How does that work? I'm thinking Derek, Andy, and Allison are all fair game for that question. Allison, you're looking at me. Okay. You want to start?
Well, I can start.
Yeah, please use a mic, okay. Especially for the videographer.
So how reimbursement works for this project is similar to any project that we would do that has to do with facilities in the school district. RIDE has what's called a housing aid reimbursement, so any work that we do on school facilities gets reimbursed for our district at a base rate of 35%. But in 2017, the state commissioned a report called the Jacobs Report, which showed the conditions of the school buildings throughout the state were deteriorating, and they wanted to give incentives to districts to do more repairs, maintenance, and possibly replace aging buildings. And so RIDE added incentive bonuses on top of that base rate in order to give incentives to districts to do that work. And they are in 5% buckets for different categories. And so when you do projects that check those boxes for each of those incentives, you can add incentives up to what is now 20% on top of your base rate. So for us, that's 55% of our project qualifies, which is why we decided to undertake the master plan process at that time in 2019.
But exactly how does it work in terms of when does the state reimburse? Do they just, oh, we passed the bond, they're gonna give us 55%, or how does that work?
Yeah, sure. So good evening, Derek Osterman, and delighted to be here, and I'll try and take on the second part of that question. So in terms of how it works, we go through a couple of phases with RIDE to get the state appropriation approved. You have already submitted your stage 1 application, and we resubmitted that in September. We'll be submitting what's called a stage 2, where we identify to the state of Rhode Island and the School Building Authority what you intend to do. So assuming the referenda is successful, on or before February 15th, we'll submit the intention in a very formal way in terms of the plans and specifications, cost estimating that supports the expenditure. And at that time, leading into the end of the fiscal year, so by June 30 of 2024, it would be anticipated that the state would say, yes, we agree, this is a good use of both your money and the state's money. We want to support you in this way. And they enter into a memorandum of agreement or understanding that basically indicates that, yes, they will in fact support the projects and provide housing aid. So at that time, your 35% is locked in, which is your baseline by right appropriation. They also give you indication as to the bonuses you will likely qualify for. When the projects are substantially complete or essentially finished with construction, they then go ahead and certify those bonuses and provide the additional incentive. So it will not be until the end, until we have a complete lock on the 55%. But again, we'll know as of the close of this fiscal period, June 24, what we're likely to receive and how they intend to participate.
Thank you, Derek.
Sure.
Andy, what happens with the reimbursement money? It mailed in a big fat check, and then who is it mailed to, or who does it go to, and what can you use it for?
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Elizabeth, for that lead-in. Because one thing I wanted to add that's really important to me about that process that Derek and Allison just outlined is the fact that it's not as simple as we submit a project and we start getting it annually. So there's a delay, and Derek mentioned it, it's a substantial completion. So when you look at some of those of you that have been adventurous enough to try to dive into our debt schedules, which are a really fun activity, you'll actually see a time period where there's a jump, right, in tax impact. So, and that jump occurs because we haven't yet hit substantial completion and we haven't started receiving the subsidy from the state. So that's a critical point. The other piece that you might see, which is a topic a lot of people don't understand, it's something called PAYGO. So what that means to RIDE is they are going to front us some of the reimbursement, which means we don't have to wait until the end of the project to receive it all. So at $150 million, we're going to receive everything being equal, we would receive about $11 million of upfront money. Okay, you may say, why is that important to get the money up front? Because it means if the project is accurately estimated, it's a $150 million project, but we're getting $10 or $11 million up front, that means we don't have to borrow $150 million. We can borrow $140 million, which affects tax impact, debt schedules, long-term tax impact throughout the entire project over the 30 years. So those are some of the elusive things that we don't have the answers to yet until stage 2, stage 3 is completed, projects are bid out, we know how much the projects are going to cost, and then exactly when we're going to issue the debt. That's probably the key factor when it comes to this particular point. It kind of rolls into some of the finance, and I won't get into that now. Issuing of the debt in one tranche of $150 million based on economic influences and interest rates and a multitude of other things, or multiple tranches that we can maybe leverage that to better our position to lessen the tax impact. So I think, Derek and I think Allison covered a little bit in terms of what it can be used for. So there are specific tranches of information. I may hand it back to Derek to just run through those in the project that we're focused on receiving the 5%.
Right, hold on. I think maybe I want to keep it a little higher level right now because we only have an hour and there are a lot of other topics, if we can go back to that, but go ahead, Mark.
Yes, good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming out. Thanks to East Greenwich News, Rotary, the Chamber. I think I left one group off, New England Tech. And it's great to have you out here because this really is an opportunity for the community to get engaged and understand this bond. One thing about the reimbursement, we'll probably hear a lot about reimbursement tonight, but I want to emphasize the incentive points that are offered by the state now. Our normal reimbursement rate is 35%. We now will be eligible for a 55% reimbursement. And this was in part due to state bonds which were passed in 2018 and 2022 to support funding for educational facilities and buildings. And we're taking advantage of this. This incentive, this additional 20% on top of our base 35%, will expire in the end of June. So this is our opportunity to really maximize the ability for us to implement a very impactful bond and very impactful improvements that will improve the entire district. Without this reimbursement, this bond would not be possible. We're eligible for up to an additional $30 million, and that makes the difference between having a bond of $150 million where the state pays 82.5 and we pay 67.5. And given that dynamic, it allows us to have a project which impacts the entire district and will have impact for many decades to come.
Okay,
So that's an important
I want to switch, I want to ask one more part of this question really, and that is, Allison, maybe this is starting with you. What happens if this bond does not pass? Two questions there. Is there time to try again, or is there a plan B? And what happens with that base reimbursement rate? That's still available, correct?
Yes. So, let me take your
Yeah.
questions. and
Sure.
then-
What happens if it doesn't pass?
So, just so that we're clear, everything that gets done, everything that's done on this project is done via our building committee, which is a regulatory committee. So RISE requires us to have certain members and that projects be submitted to the building committee. So, very hopeful that the bond is going to pass because this is a wonderful opportunity, as Dr. Schwager just pointed out. However, there is no one answer if the bond doesn't pass. I think there are a lot of different possible pathways that can be followed. And that's really going to have to go back to the building committee because there are so many stakeholders that are involved. You have the school committee and the district, you have the town council, you have the town manager. There are all different kinds of implications. And so I don't think you can say, if it doesn't pass, we're going to do this. We have to pretty much regroup, look at our options, and as a committee make a recommendation that would then have to be approved by the school committee and the town council to move forward. So I couldn't tell you what that is right now. I don't think anybody at this table could, but they're welcome to try.
And yet, just to
But the
reiterate,
35%,
yeah.
we always have that. So that is part of Rhode Island State Legislature. That's a statute that says, and
The
that RISE
only,
has codified regulations.
the only body that could change that would be the General Assembly,
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I think that's good on that. Oh, one other part of the reimbursement, and this is for Andy. Are there limits on what that can be used for? Like, in other words, could you just go and decide to buy a new fleet of police cars with that money?
No, it's not. It's specifically tied to the school bond, the resolution, and the language associated with the bond act itself. So any of the reimbursement has to be used for the project as articulated in the stage 2 and ultimately the stage 3 application that's approved by the Department of Education.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to shift topics to construction and abutters. including students and teachers, particularly with Hannaford and Frenchtown, construction will be taking place in or near residential neighborhoods. What safeguards will you have in place to ensure that any damage caused by construction can be resolved? Derek, Allison, Mark.
Sure, I'm happy to try and start. So thank you for the question. It's a really great one, and construction obviously can be a difficult and disruptive thing to people's lives. I think that is one of the many reasons why RIDE requires a project management firm to help communities oversee projects such as these of this scale and magnitude. So in terms of safeguards, really the construction is limited to the construction site itself. The contractors will be fully bonded and insured. Everyone on the project will be fully insured. And really the idea is that we've been very deliberate about making sure that these projects can occur, for the most part, not in schools that are operational, where we're able to take most of or the entirety of sites and contain them with construction, fencing, and barrier, and put these buildings up or renovate them the same way that a new house would go up in the community, right? And so I think it is the builder's responsibility, ultimately, to make sure that they're responsible and working within the limits of their site. But everyone certainly will follow best practices, state law, and ultimately be insured for the work.
One other aspect of that question, is there a plan to monitor abutters within a certain distance before, during, and after construction?
Nothing specific that I'm aware of, no.
Okay. Would anyone else like to comment?
Yeah, let me comment on that, Elizabeth. So I've gotten a lot of, our public engagement site, which I know a lot of you have, or at least some of you have engaged on and reviewed some of the threads of conversations that we've had. So I've had this conversation with a number of people in town, and I say this totally respectfully, that I think as a community, we're suffering from 2010 as a community with a little bit of PTSD as to the issues that were sustained with the coal project. In 32 years of municipal government, I've been involved in many, many projects. I've never had, ever, I guess I'm lucky, issues with the neighbors' homes, properties, private property. This community had that problem in 2010, and it is an active, lively discussion today, 13 years later. So clearly, it has impacted this community, and it is a major point of contention and concern for many, many people who live here. So in complementing what Derek just mentioned, another piece of this that I've been communicated with on is when is there engagement with the neighborhoods? So for me, that process, which is going to need to happen in this community because of the 2010 issue, is really something that has to happen once we know. I've been asked recently, and it seems like this project's been going on for a decade. It's been about 3 years, but we still don't have defined schools in defined locations at Hannaford or Frenchtown yet. So until the designs are finished, stage 3 gets approved, the buildings are surveyed out on the property, we can then have a contractor hired and we can start the process where we can intelligently engage the neighboring community so that we'll have an idea as to, and get out in front of kind of institutional knowledge on the neighborhood, things that residents may have seen, they may incur, they may have high water tables, they may not, they may have seen or heard other things happening to their neighbors. But I think there'll be an information collection period that I think would be helpful to all of us, because I don't think there's a way that we can avoid this topic, and nor would we want to. And Derek noted everyone's insured, but we also don't want to minimize the impact that happened in 2010. It was significant for a number of residents. So we want to make sure that we're on top of that. I think we have a plan in place to do that, but that will be coming, and I don't want anybody to think it's being pushed off. It's not being pushed off, but I think it's going to be a right time and place for us to really dive into that topic.
Thank you. This is for Brian, first anyway. Construction will be happening at some of these schools while school is in session. What is the plan to mitigate the impact on students and staff? And are the projects going to be all going on simultaneously? Is this like a mob event, or are we sequencing from one school to another?
So I'll do my best to start to answer that, and I will be definitely pivoting to Derek. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming out tonight. The way that we have conceived of the projects now, there would be a first, and this is just, we've conceived of them now, so this could change. We would first do a new build at Frenchtown, keep the students who are in that Frenchtown building until the new building is built, move those students from the old Frenchtown to the new Frenchtown, and use Frenchtown as a swing space for the other school projects. So I can't speak to are they all going to happen at once? My guess is no, but I'm going to let Mr. Osterman answer to the best of his ability at this point.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's correct. So to the extent that and we do still have some work to do before we can commit to a schedule, but that's generally the idea. So after the students at what today is Frenchtown move into their new building, we have the opportunity, for example, to bring the student population from Hannaford over to the former building on the Frenchtown site while that new building is either erected as new or an ad reno is completed. So those are the really big projects. The other ones that we, of course, are studying are Meadowbrook and the high school. Some or most of that work may be accomplishable over summers. It's possible that there might be select areas that need to happen with the school year. I don't think we have a definitive answer on that just yet. But the stated goal, as I understand it from the community, is essentially that we want minimal to no disruption to teaching and learning while this all is to occur. And so that's part of the planning that's gone onto the project is so no, the projects will all be sequenced. So some things will be happening in parallel, but it's not a flash mob at every school with construction going on across the town all at the same time. And you know, a lot of thought will go into the sequencing of how it's all going to unfold.
Great, thank you. This is a question about oversight. Who is going to provide oversight of this project, both the construction and the dollars? And how much oversight will the town council have over design and spending decisions? So I guess the first part of the question might be, who wants to take that one? I think maybe Mark takes the second part in terms of town council, but Allison.
So if you look regulatorily, that is why there is a school building committee. So I can't speak, there are still decisions have to be made statutorily. I think the town council has delegable authority over finances on these projects, but the school committee has authority over the buildings and care, custody, and control. So it's set up legally to be a joint project because RIDE, who is a major investor in this, does not want to invest in a project that the entire community can't get behind. So it's set up so that the school committee and the town council are sort of equal partners and they play their roles. As far as precedent in this community, I know that when Cole was built, there was an agreement, it was a building committee charge that laid out how all of that was going to work, who was going to be, when the town council had to approve something, when the school committee had to approve something, what was the OPM's role, who had day-to-day management over the project. And so my understanding is that this building committee, as we move closer to that, will establish a similar agreement that will lay out all of exactly how the management of the day-to-day project is going to go and when things have to be approved by whom. But right now, I mean, ultimately, it is a joint project managed by both bodies with oversight from both, with the building committee making recommendations so that this is truly a community project, and that is the intent.
Okay, Mark, could you just address, how much oversight the town council will have over design and spending decisions?
I think Allison's framing of this as a joint project is very important. The council certainly has representation. So the school building committee was appointed by the school committee and has the charge of designing the scope of the master facilities plan for the schools. And as part of the school building committee, there are 2 places available for town council representation. Myself and Raymond Engelhardt are filling those roles on the school building committee. Also, the town manager is on the school building committee. So there is a communication back and forth and input between the 2 bodies on the school building committee. And we have to work together to facilitate the project. Ultimately, the town does issue the bonds and oversees the finance of the enterprise. And so there will be contributions from the town to impact how the project proceeds. And as a group, I mean, we'll give our advice to the school building committee on the impact of the project on town finances, town budget, and together we'll work to make sure that the project is financially stable and financially managed correctly.
This question kind of goes back to, or this follow-up from me, to the finance or the reimbursement, or not reimbursement, but financing. When we approve or don't approve this bond, if we approve it, you go and you're not taking out $150 million in one fell swoop. It's in tranches, is that correct? Does each time that happens, so let's say you're going to bond for $50 million initially, does that come back to the town council for any kind of vote?
Yeah, let me take that, Elizabeth, if I could. So yeah, these are all decisions that are yet to happen. So a decision on the 150 or 70 and 80 or whatever the combination may be are going to be driven by the work that Derek's doing in terms of the schedule, who we hire, is it 1 company, is it 4 companies, whatever that might be. But there are many variables that are going to occur with the fiscal assumptions that we've utilized. So the challenge here is when I talk to residents, you actually want to know something that we're not able to tell you today. You want to know today what it's going to cost you each year for the next 30 years. It's impossible. There's no way it can happen because none of us are probably going to be here anyway. So it's going to be different people, different time. Some of you will be in town, some of you won't. Priorities may change in the community. But there are many debt strategies that we're going to use. And when I use this word conservative, it has no political affiliation, right? And I said this to everybody on our building committee. To be the successful towns manage conservatively because it's the only way you can advance your community. It's the only way to do it. If you are volatile and you swing with decisions and ideologies and change, you never advance. So the only way to do it is to do it conservatively. So as we go forward and we look at ways to manage this debt, that might mean refinancing. We can't call the bonds for 10 years. So if we get stuck with a bad interest rate at 4%, we're locked in for 10 years. We just refinanced about 3 years ago with the coal bond, which saves you money like 10 or 20 years from now. Nothing I can really even comment on today. So it's important for you to know that that is our approach. We have a financial team, and I'll compliment each person who noted the relationship that we have. Ultimately, the town is responsible for the funding and for the financial management of it. The school does not play a role in that, although they have responsibility, because ultimately, as Allison noted, you're turning over care and custody of tens of millions of dollars in community assets to the school committee. So they have a responsibility to manage them effectively going forward. So there's a shared responsibility, no matter what the committee makeup is going to be. But it has to be done in a very conservative and thoughtful way. If not, none of you are going to be able to live in town because we're going to price you out, right? So that is my commitment. We have a financial team which is excellent. With our finance director, Trish Sunderland, with our fiscal advisors, our bond counsel, leadership from the town council and other public bodies, as well as other municipal finance professionals around the state, that we feel confident that in the next 2 years before we issue this debt, what you've been seeing for estimates from me and other people are going to be better. We have no choice but to be conservative, and when I say that, I'm giving you worst case scenarios. Because I can't sugarcoat for you. That's our job. We need to give you worst case. Later, I'll give you the good news. Like when we can massage and we make structural decisions. So we feel confident at the 150. whether it's one time or twice, but there'll be many decisions that will all come back before the council for decision-making as part of that process before we issue any debt associated with the project.
In terms of fixed or variable interest rate, I did remember that you had refinanced, the town had refinanced some debt. These things, do they tend to be fixed?
Yes, yeah, they do. Yeah, they tend to be fixed, and we're one of 6 communities in the state of Rhode Island that have a AA1 bond rating. The top, it's not a AAA with Moody's. S&P, a couple of towns have a AAA, but we're AA1 top bond rating, which means we get better interest rates than everybody else. So that is going to weigh itself in this process. So we will monitor the market. We'll see where we are when Derek says, okay, time to issue. And we're going to go out, we're going to test the market and see if all of a sudden things swing in the next 2 years, which looks unlikely, but if it does and it's really good at that point, we can issue the 150. If not, we're going to probably issue less, and we're going to hedge the market to see if we can get better rates when we issue the second or third tranche to be able to protect, just like you would, right? When you're taking out a loan, you're doing work on your house, getting a home equity loan, you're going to do the same thing. This is just a big project, but we're going to do all the same things because we don't want to make a mistake and leave money on the table when we're going to need it for other priorities in town. Plus, we're going to need it for the operating program to support the school and their new programs in these new facilities. So it's a little bit of all of that, but you'll see the strategy play itself out in the next couple of years.
I have a question about the bond language. There's a word in there that has tripped up some people, or just not tripped them up, but made them question the word acquisition. The bond, is there any plan to buy land for this project?
No. There is not.
Then
No.
why is that word, what is that word? What's it doing in there?
Yeah, so this is another hot question. Thanks for that. Elizabeth, you're on the hot questions here tonight.
Thanks to our
So
readers.
it's not only purchase property, it's also take property, okay? It has now been on this project for 3 years. That has never come up, ever, I'm being honest with you. But areas where it could come up, where if a new school gets built, there are other renovations, maybe there's an in-ground easement of a utility of some type that has to cross Tim's property, and he's amenable, and he's excited about it, and we're going to pay him for that easement to bring a utility in, and we're all in agreement. We need to have language that allows us in the bond language to use funding for those types of things, but with the project as articulated by the building committee, Meadowbrook's internal renovation, nothing's happening. High school, internal, nothing's happening. You're looking at Frenchtown and Hannaford. Those are only 2 places where you might have movement of a building from where it is today. But those properties can handle the 2 buildings. So the likelihood of that ever coming up in any scenario is almost 0. So I think that's the reason why you really haven't heard that before. But I appreciate you bringing that up because that's a concern that I've had brought forward by a number of residents. And we wanted to try to put that to bed tonight. That is just not on the table, has never been on the table, and really shouldn't be necessary at all with the limited project that we're working on.
Thank you. I wanted to talk about future growth. East Greenwich is growing, unlike so many other similar communities in Rhode Island. And so what does that mean for this new school building? I know that demographic changes are very difficult to predict. Still, our numbers continue to grow. How does this project anticipate the possibility of more students?
Yeah, these are excellent questions. So demographics is a common question in every community that I work in. And we've really spent an awful lot of time here in East Greenwich working with you all about understanding the numbers, how to appropriately plan for them, and also making sure that the state would be in agreement with as they're more than a 50% funder. So we had multiple experts come to the table to provide several assessments, and research was done to kind of look at past projections, look at current, look at going forward for 10 years, look at planned development in the community, and what I can say is I think there is an understanding that East Greenwich will continue to see some level of growth. In some cases, it's near to flat, and in some cases, it really is true growth. But I would say that's a testament to you all in the community. And the reason I say that is because it is awfully challenging to substantiate even maintaining, never mind growing. When we look around at the rest of the state of Rhode Island and New England in particular, most districts that we work with are talking about decreasing enrollment and needing to consolidate because there are fewer students. And I would say that's a testament to you as a community in terms of the quality of the education you're providing, the investment that you continue to make in teaching and learning, the proposed investment with this bond. So I think that's a really wonderful thing. But rest assured, it has been studied and restudied, and folks have questioned me and my team every step of the way, and I think we still get questions, and we love them, but an awful lot of wonderful research and study has gone into those projections so that when your new schools do come online, they will serve you for the planned 50-year minimum that's intended, and so that's really what this is looking to do. This is looking to make meaningful change that will last at minimum 50 years.
So if suddenly we get a huge influx of students, you're confident that the schools will be able to handle that? Huge is not a precise term, sorry.
Sure, yeah, no, I think that's great. To the extent that we're able. So I cannot control world events as much as I'd like to be able to. So who knows what could happen. But based on everything we know today, yes, we're very comfortable that the facilities that you're building will be appropriate long into the future, yes. And can accommodate essentially the expected swing. So.
Thank you. There's a tax question. You kind of already touched on it, but Andy, but understanding that the tax impacts will depend on when the debt is incurred and a variety of other factors. In brief and broad strokes, if possible, can you outline how the bond will impact taxes over the next, say, 10 years or so? As I recall, there's a bit about, like, we climb up, then we start going down.
Yeah, I apologize. I'm struggling with a head cold, so my voice is kind of in and out. A couple things. So what I referred to earlier was regarding strategy, debt structure strategy. So not over the 10, but over the 30 years, we've estimated based on the very preliminary, very conservative numbers that we're using, that annual tax impact will be about 2.34%. Now, what I want to explain is that that's not just because of the bond. So when you look at our debt schedules, and I challenge you to find this in another community because they just don't provide the level of depth that our finance director has provided with our fiscal advisor. So on our debt schedules, you will see all the existing town debt and school debt for the next 30 years that we know of. You'll see operating budget projections over 30 years. You'll see capital improvement projections. You'll see library fund projections. You'll see debt fund projections. You'll see everything for the 30 years. So when I say 2.34%, it's variable from a few years where there are a reduction in the tax rate to other years where it goes up as high as about 6%. And that's very early in the process before the state reimbursement actually comes online. So over the 30 years, and this is the reason why I'm speaking so confidently on it, and if I wasn't confident, I would tell you, is the fact that over the 30 years, 2.34% is basically the sweet spot where we are right now. You see between a 2 and 3% impact every year, pretty much. And you see some years where it's been a little less, some years where it's been a little bit more. It's all those other decisions that we all debate annually at budget time that will affect this process. So whether it's us or people in the future, they could influence it. But at a spot in time, and I know there are a number of people in the community who've done some additional work on this, and I'll be honest with you, the reason why we have not put forward additional detail for you as a property owner to go on and say, here's my property on First Avenue, and it's going to be X number of dollars, it's because of all the variability. So let's talk again in about 2 years from now when we're going to issue the debt, and I can probably give you a pretty good number as to where you're going to be, but I can't give it to you today. So we've held off on going further, and I think what we've provided in terms of the schedules is so much more in depth than what you're going to find anyplace else at this point. So it'll take a little bit of time, but at this point it's at 2.3%. I expect those numbers to get a little bit better, but again, I'll hedge a little bit and say there's so many other things that none of us know about that the community is going to need. We don't know what the economy is going to do. We don't know where interest rates will fall. We don't know where your priorities are going to be 5 years, 10 years from now. So that will all influence your tax impact on a go-forward basis. But we are comfortable, very comfortable at the $150 million mark that we can manage that debt with our existing obligations to keep us in that 2 to 3% range where we are already annually.
All right, thank you. A question about the high school. I know some in the community are frustrated that more money is not being committed to the high school. Can you explain why? Allison, can you start, or Brian? Brian, go for it.
Sure. The bottom line is that the high school, as I look at our permanent principal, Dr. Pat Page, who's here, thank you for coming, Dr. Page. The high school has enough space for teaching and learning right now. Our elementary schools do not. Our 4 elementary schools are beyond capacity. Some of our students are learning critical skills in a closet. And if you recall, the beginning of our school year in August, we had an early release day because on the 3rd floor of Cole, which is our newest building, by the way, on the 3rd floor of Cole at 7 o'clock in the morning, the classroom reading was at 87 degrees. We are teaching some of our students their most critical skills in spaces that I would offer to you are not appropriate for teaching and learning, but we have no other spaces for them. Our elementary schools have trailers and have had them for decades. That's simply not the best space. And there's nothing, I'm not judging the reality of those buildings because when they were built, they reflected the best educational visioning at the time. But 50 and 60 years ago, before I was even born, we didn't talk about social emotional health. We didn't talk about speech language. We didn't talk about special spaces for students who have autism or who are on the autism spectrum. For lack of a better example, 50 and 60 years ago, it was 30 students in one room with a woman at the front. And that's not a sexist comment, that's the reality of education. We know better how to educate our students now in 2023. And our buildings just don't allow us to do it in the way that you expect as a community. One of the reasons I was drawn to this community was the strategic plan. Very powerful in its simplicity. All means all. There's no carve-outs. There's no caveats there. We can't do all means all in the current building. So while I agree with members of the community, I would love to put more money towards the high school. The teaching and learning spaces, which is what you are asking us to do, they're enough for what we have there. There are other spaces that are definitely in need. The locker rooms are definitely in need. We want a better space in the high school for special education. We would love to revamp the auditorium to make it more reflective of a place like this that could be a community asset. But with these funds, all of our buildings will be better community spaces for all of us on the weekends and for teaching and learning.
Allison, do you have anything to add, or Mark? Mark, go for it.
Just going to mention that you said not enough money is going to high school. Is that a concern?
Yeah, that some people want more money spent on the high school.
I think that's been discussed a lot at the school building committee meeting, and I think it's more than just what is the dollar amount. What are we trying to achieve at the high school? What are the goals? What are the deficiencies there? We really have identified the major deficiencies: special education services, life skills training, athletics and locker rooms, fields, arts, music, theater, and career and technical education. Those are the areas which have really been identified as the major deficiencies. The building itself, the space is good, the bones of the building are good. So now, if and when this bond passes, we then can do the engineering, the architecture, and see how much this is going to cost, and see how much it's going to take to meet those needs. One thing that is fortunate in this bond is due to the enhanced reimbursement. We were able to stretch this bond to $150 million. Some of the original estimates were lower than that, and that when you then try to just determine how much money would go to each individual school, the high school numbers were lower. But now with the increased bond ceiling that we have available, we may have more money to put toward the high school. But I think the idea is, how much is it going to cost to meet the deficiencies that we have in the high school? And then how can we design the project, because we are in the design process, which will be going on for almost a year from after the time the stage 2 application is approved and submitted in February. A year we'll be designing this, and how can we maximize the impact on all of the deficiencies, all the needs, to meet the problems with the high school. And I think we'll have a lot of ability to meet those deficiencies.
Mark, you referenced fields. Are fields part of this project at all at the high school?
I don't want to get myself in trouble.
Can I jump
So,
in?
yes.
Not currently. We shall see, but no, not explicitly currently, no.
All right, thank you. Maintenance. People, I remember when Cole was built, we talked about how it hadn't been maintained, and that's why we needed a new school building. And I'm hearing the same language now. What is the plan for ongoing school maintenance post-construction? If maintenance remains at the whim of year-to-year budgeting, how can money for maintenance be protected so we can get the most out of our new construction?
So right now, maintenance is at the whim of the reality that we can't hire people to do the work that we're asking them to do. Believe it or not, we have more than enough in our budget. We just don't currently have the staff. We don't have people who are applying for our jobs like we did. Well, I wasn't part of the league, like you did years ago. We have a dwindling staff. Just like every other major industry post-COVID, we are seeing staff shortages left, right, and center. And our maintenance is one of those places. We are negotiating with that unit coming up. We're going to make another generous offer, I'm sure, as the school committee has done with the previous 2 collective bargaining agreements. And we're going to work on any problems potentially that exist within the negotiated agreement. But the reality is we can't get people in the buildings to do the work.
But I'm also talking about, or I'm really talking about maintaining the building, the structure of the building so that it wouldn't have to be replaced before 50 years. So this is beyond custodial stuff. This is, the facilities. You might have a line item in your budget for $500,000 for facilities, but you don't have enough. You didn't get enough, but you don't have a large enough budget to pay for your French teacher. So a lot of, people might clamor for a French teacher, so you cut your maintenance budget. Is there any way out of that?
Yeah, let me jump on that. So I can speak from experience. I was very fortunate to sit on the school construction task force with former treasurer Magaziner back in 2017. A critical point of the plan that was developed along with that initial $250 million bond, plus all the incentives that were noted, is a maintenance requirement. So there are 3 ways, I'm probably not going to get them all right, I haven't touched this in a long time, but there are 3 ways that a district can submit to RIDE to address a work. If we use this funding, we're then locked in to have to spend a certain amount of money on maintenance at these facilities. Presently, we use a 3% of operating formula. That was the least expensive option for our district, so we've been using that. That might change when square footage changes. There's another option associated with square footage, and there's a third option associated with overall building value. So this year it's about 1.3 million. Whether that's enough or not enough, we can probably debate it and figure that out. But there's actually a requirement in terms of using these bond funds, in terms of receiving the reimbursement, that will obligate us, so we have to meet it. Now, if you don't meet the number, they subtract it from your state aid, so you can't escape it. So you're better off funding it directly. So that will not be, now above and beyond that number, we can debate it during budget season, which we always do. That's fun. But beyond that, so it'll be a requirement that we have to be able to address one of those options that the school will decide in their budget process which one is most appropriate.
Thank you. I just wanted to add to when Town Manager Nada was talking about moving a town forward by being conservative, and he was discussing all of the different the different things that were included in all of those tax impact studies that they made public, one of the things was operating expenses for the school district, which I believe was estimated around between 3 and 4%, which is a very conservative estimate for budget. I would say we, much like the town, has been growing at around 2% a year, at least for the last decade. So that's a really conservative estimate that allows for, you know, those possible increased operating expenses and being able to meet our minimum requirements on all of these new investments that we're running.
Thank you. There's been a lot of talk about Eldridge Elementary, which is our almost 100-year-old school building that is, as planned in the proposal, it would be decommissioned. What could become of that building?
Yeah, let's start.
I had you, yeah.
Let's let Mark start.
I was going to start to say that this was considered at the school building committee, and Derek and Colliers gave examples, both locally and nationally, of ways that municipal buildings could be used in the community. So I think the intention is to form another group to consider what's going to happen to Eldridge, that it has lived its life as an educational facility, but can be very useful to the community. So I think, Derek, you can mention some of the different projects that you've seen and reviewed with the school building committee.
Yeah, sure, happy to. So it's not unusual that a community would have a treasured landmark such as Eldridge, and so in talking to East Greenwich, we started to look for precedent studies and found that quite often these buildings find new homes as community centers or spaces for art installation, but continue to be hubs in other ways, whether that's maybe adult education, if education is still important at that particular building. But as a town asset and knowing how valuable it is to the community, both the immediate residents, but then kind of the iconic nature of the building and where it sits on the hill, well situated to downtown, I think there's a real passion, and it was exciting to see. I remember at one of the community forums that we hosted, a gentleman came in, and I'm going to forget some of the details, but I bet the superintendent will remember, but he was pretty adamant that he didn't love what was happening. And he talked to us about the naming of the building and where it came from and the history of it, and that he expected that leadership would do more, would do something, would honor that building and the gentleman it was named after in some meaningful way. And I think by the end of the presentations and discussions about the possibilities and ultimately you as a town will get to decide what it becomes, he had kind of changed and said, wow, you know, I can start to see it. And so long as it is something and it is respected and maintained, I can get behind that. So any of the panelists can jump in because I know I've missed a bunch of the details there, but it was fun to see the passion in the community from both him and other members who were regular attendees at our meetings and who really spoke with a lot of passion about how they felt about the building.
I'll simply say, and thanks to Dr. Schwager for reminding me, it was Alan Clark who came up to me the night of the first community forum. And I was greeting everybody at the door. And I said, hi, I'm Brian Ricca. I'm the lucky guy that gets to run the schools. And he said, hi, I'm Alan Clark. You're never going to shut Eldridge. And I said, are you at least open to hearing this? Just hear what we have to say. And Mr. Clark had the final word on the second night of our community forum, in which he said, all I ask is that on July 1, when it is no longer a school, you are doing something to honor the legacy of Dr. Eldridge. And that's all we're asking for from you as a community, is to be open to what the possibilities are for the future, not only of Eldridge, but for all of the six schools currently, hopefully 5 schools going forward in East Greenwich Public Schools.
If I can just add one thing.
Sure.
I was very lucky in my career to work for 10 years in the town of South Kingstown. 5 years I worked directly in the neighborhood guild, right, which reminds me of Eldridge, not physically, but what its future could be. It's a facility that was gifted to, it's an old mill complex, gifted to the town with an endowment. And really the community, all ages, revolve around that facility. It's like the heartbeat of Peacedale, but really a much larger town, about 32,000 people in South Kingstown. And it's dedicated to, in complementing everything everybody has already said, in terms of not just pure recreational programming, but arts and education and after-school programming, the teen center, athletics. It would complement, and you can tell I'm a champion of this, so I'm never going to stop talking about it the next 5 years. So, but we're investing significantly in Eldridge Field over the next several years. You're going to see about a 700 to 800.
Which is town-owned and not owned by the school, correct?
That's right, yeah. So that facility is going to be significantly upgraded as well. So imagine a facility like that in the middle of town that would be an epicenter of all ages, activities of all ages, with a beautiful park facility out front in perpetuity to be able to support that. So it is really, you're the ones who are going to make that decision. And I don't think it waits for 5 or 6 years. Several years from now, once Derek kicks that first domino and the elementaries start to, it's when that building's going to be empty. So it would be when Frenchtown and Hannaford are completed and those kids, students 1 to 5 are in those buildings. So it'll be a couple of years from now, not that far in the future, that, as Dr. Swager mentioned, and Superintendent, that a consultant would be brought on to engage you and really to look at that facility so that we can address some of the needs of the facility, but also look at what your needs are long-term. And we think it could have an absolutely incredible outcome for the makeup of this town in particular, because we're such a young, vibrant town. With 14,000 people with 2,600 students. Per capita, that is way above most other towns. Everybody around us is losing students left and right. Even larger towns have less students. So we're a young, vibrant community, but we lack some of those types of facilities in town. And our senior needs are increasing at Swift. So as you start to see that building morph a little bit to deal with Swift and our elderly population and other community services that we offer there, really Eldridge would become, and I think respectfully, for the naming as well and all of the other uses of that building, be a very respectful use of that for the community. At least that's one concept that I want to give you a little bit of a motion that a lot of my professional staff are tied to see if we can help bring that along in the coming years.
Just to be clear, there's no plan to sell this building. Obviously, we're still in the early days, but you're saying no?
The way I understand it is that once it is decommissioned as a school, the responsibility of it is turned over to the town. I've had many conversations with not only town councilors, with the town manager, with community members. Not one person has mentioned selling it.
Okay, we're a little past 8, but I want to ask one last question because we did start late. With so many school districts moving down this same path, are there enough contractors to meet the needs? How are we going to make sure that East Greenwich gets a competitive price? Are we allowed to hire from out of state?
Yes. So yes, you can hire from out of state. Right, the market is a curious animal for sure. From my perspective, I think it's really exciting. I think it's the intention, depending upon who you ask, of the bonus program, of investing in schools, really did and continues to do a lot for the state of Rhode Island. So it's a wonderful investment in teaching and learning that was jump-started by that Jacobs report that we talked about earlier this evening, that under the Raimondo administration had identified at least $2.2 billion of need, right? So there's a clear commitment to education, and on the back end, what that looks like, that also is jobs and economic opportunity for the state of Rhode Island. And I think the state is doing the best it can to keep pace with the work that's coming. But I think it's a really exciting moment for the state in general. In terms of will we and can we find labor, we absolutely will. Being in sort of the major urban environment that is smack in the middle between New York and Boston, there is plenty of labor that can come south or vice versa come north. And ultimately, it just requires focus and discussion about how we parse up this work to be bid, whether it's one large package, whether it's smaller packages, our exact timing into the marketplace and what supply chain looks like. But all of that gets developed with the schedule. And I think rather than be too nervous about it, I like to focus on the positive and be excited. I see it as a wonderful investment in education. I see it as a wonderful investment in terms of jobs here in the great state of Rhode Island. And so I'm excited and I'm reasonably confident that we'll do just fine.
Anybody else have anything to say? Well, I think we're going to wrap it up, and I know we're not taking questions, but I certainly invite anybody who has additional questions to either reach out to all of these people who have addresses right here on this sheet, which is in the back. This was put together by, who put this together? It's not ours.
Main Street Media?
But the school building committee. So that is not ours, but there is information and contact info. Or let us know what you guys are wondering about. Again, it informs our reporting. Thank you all so much for coming out, and vote starting today. I saw Mark Schwager earlier with an I voted sticker on. You can vote at Town Hall, in the town clerk's office, up until Election Day. On Election Day, you go to Swift Community Center and you cast your ballot there. So thank you so much.